Joined again by Massachusetts Senator Bruce Tarr. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Tarr.
Thanks, Corey and Heather. It's great to be with you.
Great to be with you too. So Senator, we understand that you, the House and the Senate were busy yesterday working on a relief bill. Do you want to tell us about that?
Sure, Heather. It's a bill that we've been working on for a number of days now that has a number of different components that are intended to help cities and towns with some of the challenges that they're facing right now. And it's important to understand that the legislature is functioning. So for instance, yesterday, the House was in session, the Senate was in session. We're actually in informal sessions, which means that there has to be at least one member of each party present, along with the presiding officer, and that serves as a check and balance. And any member can actually object to those sessions continuing. So we're operating on a completely consensus-based process. So I generally I do appoint the minority member in the Senate, and early in the day we had Senator Tran, and then I took the torch from him and was here until about 8 o'clock at night on the floor, and we passed this bill. We got it to the governor's desk, and the governor signed it today, and it has an emergency preamble, which means that it takes effect immediately, and that's important. And I'm going to give you some of the details, but I'll try to do it maybe in some bites so that I don't go on forever, and maybe if you want to ask some questions, because it's a fairly big bill. But the idea of it is to respond to the contingencies that we're facing. So for instance, something I know would be interesting to both of you is there's been some discussion about allowing alcohol to be delivered with takeout meals from our restaurants. And there was some confusion about that, about whether it had already happened or not, and it had not. It has now. And so malt beverages and wine can be delivered through takeout, and that will help in a couple of ways. It will help the restaurants clear out some of their inventory, and it will also help them generate a little bit more income. So that's an important thing that's in the bill. There are other things that more center around the operations of cities and towns. So for instance, one thing that's been on everyone's mind is, what do we do about town meeting? And so a few years ago, I'd actually worked on a law that allowed the moderator, in the event of inclement weather or a public safety emergency, to postpone a town meeting under certain conditions. But at the time, we were thinking more about the snowstorms that had happened in 2015 and 2016. Now, through a language that was initiated by the governor, we also added a public health emergency. So we give the moderator the ability to push out town meeting and the ability to do it multiple times. The only requirement is that somebody needs to submit a report every time it happens to the Attorney General explaining why it happened. And obviously you can understand why we might do that. So that's an important thing. We also allow town meetings potentially to go past their normal time. We generally try to have them wrapped up by June 30th. Hopefully we aren't going to need to go past June 30th, but there is some flexibility around that. But as you both would know, that also means that it causes a problem for municipal budgets, because municipal budgets are supposed to be done by the time town meetings are done. And so there's also language in the bill that would allow incremental budgets to be done so that you could go a month at a time until you can pass a whole year's worth of budget. And I'm going to stop there because that's a lot of information.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. And I agree with you. I think there was a lot of confusion around that restaurant, the restaurants being able to serve alcohol. Can you elaborate on any of the details there? So when you go to pick up your takeout, you can order a bottle of wine, a couple of bottles of beer, but certainly not a cocktail, right?
You cannot. There was some discussion about doing that actually, but it didn't make it into the bill. And the bill has specific language about the bottle of wine has to be in an original unopened container. So you can't pour it into a glass or something smaller and sell it that way. And when it comes to the malt beverages, those have to be in an unopened container, but there's an assumption that maybe something might come in a 6-pack, so you can break away one or two from that 6-pack. So the language is just a little bit different. It doesn't say the original packaging, but it does say it has to be an unopened container.
And how about responses from the municipalities and towns to these decisions? Are you hearing a lot of relief? It was
We are. As soon as we passed this last night, we sent out information to all of the cities and towns in our Senate district, and within a few minutes, we started to get responses of appreciation and saying how useful these things will be. There are a lot of things that they're struggling with, again, because we're in a situation that is not normal. So I'm going to give you another example. There are a lot of issues around city and town permits to do things where there are timelines around when a public hearing has to happen and when action has to be taken. And if that action is not taken, to use the parlance of the legal system, it would suggest that those permits would be constructively granted because the municipality failed to act within the allotted time frame. Those are suspended under this bill so that municipalities aren't forced to do things. They can be suspended, and existing permits continue in effect, so they don't have to hold hearings necessarily to renew them. So the idea here is to give a lot of flexibility, and these are very important things. And so if you want the details, we will be posting them on social media. And of course, anybody that wants the details in writing can reach out to our office and we'll be happy to provide them.
well, fortunately for us, your colleague Don sent us some details on the bill. So I did see that it also allows extensions for property tax exemptions and deferrals. You want to talk about that?
Absolutely. So the deadline for a lot of those were April 1st, and for reasons that are obvious, folks weren't able to submit them. So there is an extension of those things because we didn't want people to lose them. And those are a whole host of abatements. For instance, veterans get a property tax abatement if they have a service-connected disability. Folks that have reached an age of seniority get a tax abatement. So all of those things got pushed off as well. And the other important thing that goes along with that is that we have quarterly tax bills that just came out that would be due on May 1st, and those are allowed to be pushed out as well into June to give some flexibility. So the requirement that you pay is being pushed out, or the municipality can push it out. They're given an option, and the time frame for abatements, which is commensurate with that process, is pushed out as well.
And that date is June 1st. Is that right?
It is. I'm going to check on that while we're talking here. I very rarely use notes, but this is so important. I'm just going to refer to some of the things that we wrote last night about the bill while we're talking, so I can make sure we get the accurate date for you.
It does look like June 1st, Senator Tarr.
Yeah. Just so you can see I've got my notes here, and I do believe it is June 1st. And again, there's so much information that I'm having to resort to actually using things that are written down to be able to keep pace with all of it. But again, the idea was postpone the time for payment and also postpone the time for abatement.
And then the last piece here, which is the larger piece, is that the state tax deadline is extended to coincide with the federal, right?
And that was a very difficult decision. The federal government had moved the deadline to July 15th a while ago, and folks were calling us and saying, well, why didn't you do the same thing immediately? And the reason we didn't do it immediately is because of a cash flow problem that creates for state government. We're required to have a balanced budget. The federal government bears no similar burden, and they can print money, which we can't. I've been looking for the printing press. I've been spending a lot of time at the State House. I had my flashlight out last night in the basement. I couldn't find it. So we live by different rules. And so to avoid the cash flow problem, number one, we're anticipating now a significant amount of money from the Federal CARES Act that was passed. And Secretary of Administration and Finance Mike Heffernan estimates that amount of money could be between approximately $1.5 billion and $2.75 billion. And I will say this on my own behalf, that if we didn't get that money, if that bill hadn't been passed, I don't think we could have postponed the date. But we know it's coming. So what we're going to have to do is, and it presents a real significant challenge, is hold a formal session of some sort, because in order to borrow money, the House and the Senate are required to take a recorded vote, and it has to be a vote of 2/3 of the members present and voting. And we haven't been holding formal sessions because we want to maintain social distancing. So right now we're having a lot of conversations about how to meet the requirements of the Constitution so that we can borrow the money we need to meet our obligations now that we've moved the tax deadline, but at the same time, we can maintain public health protocols. And that's a significant challenge. We'll figure it out. And I've already put one proposal on the table with my colleagues about how we might do this, but it is a challenge. But right now, the most important thing to know is that the tax deadline has been moved out. But I do want to call attention to a significant element of that. And that is that the deadline was moved for individuals, but for businesses, the deadline was not necessarily moved. And I shouldn't be so unequivocal here. The deadline was not moved. So if you're a corporation, for instance, you will not, you still have to file the return. And if you file it late, which you can do, then penalties won't attach. Interest still will, but not all of the other penalties and additional interest that might otherwise be attributable to a late filing. So individuals don't have to worry about that, and businesses do have to worry about that, but again, they won't get penalties, they'll just have to pay interest.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Okay. Sorry, Heather. So, and speaking of small businesses, Senator Tarr, can we speak at all to the relief programs that have been set up in place?
Absolutely, Corey. And you know, one thing that I really want to talk about today is that this is the first day that businesses have been eligible to apply for the payroll protection program. And so again, I have a very crude version of a teleprompter here. So if you notice me looking up, that is the ingenuity of the staff here at the State House who built this. So, you know, I may look a little distracted, but I want to get it right.
Is it cue cards now?
Today, well, we actually have one of the skeleton staff that's here is standing by with cue cards in case we need them.
Beautiful.
So we'll see if we have to use them. I hope we don't. But this is for loans that are up to $10 million. So these are not insignificant. And they carry a 0.5% interest rate, and their term is 2 years to maturity. But the important thing I want to emphasize for folks is that those loans will become grants. They'll be converted to grants and won't need to be paid back if employees are kept on the payroll for 8 weeks. So if you keep the payroll and you keep all your current employees and you do that for 8 weeks, and the money is used for payroll and rent and mortgage interest and utilities, the cost of doing business basically, then these convert to grants. And so that's a really important element of this. The other thing that's important is people will ask, well, how do I get one of these? Where do I go? And the answer to that is you can go to any SBA approved lender. And many of the institutions on Cape Ann are. And so they're the portal for this. Now, I've had some calls from some banks today saying, we may not be quite ready for this. We're still trying to figure it out. So I'd ask people to have patience. But I do want people to know that these loans are now available. And again, it may take your local bank some time to work it out. But the good news is this isn't being administered by a bureaucracy in Washington that may be hard to navigate. These are the folks that we deal with every day in our financial transactions on Cape Ann. So familiar folks, and the program will actually be available, and it's retroactive from February 15th, 2020. And so that way employers can actually rehire people that have been recently laid off. And it's available through June 30th, 2020. So those dates are really important. February 15th, 2020 to June 30th, 2020, with some retroactivity there going back to February 15th, with the idea that if you're a small business, you may not have known that this assistance was going to be available. So you may have laid people off so that they could collect unemployment insurance. They wouldn't be left out. And we've heard from a lot of employers that did that. But now this is available. You can apply. It is retroactive. And you can rehire your employees to try to keep your functioning business unit together.
This is part of the CARES Act.
It is indeed.
And there's also the economic injury disaster loan. Do you want to talk about that came out of CARES?
Sure. So the economic injury disaster loans actually in some ways preceded CARE Act, but they are available as well. And I'm going to have to shift notes here in just a minute. But as I do that, I'm going to ask my able assistant, Mark DeCristoforo, who's going to come, and you won't see him, but through the magic of technology that doesn't see everything, we're going to shift over our page here, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. So a couple of the things, he's passing me the pages. First of all, you can actually get a $10,000 advance on these loans as well through the SBA website, and so that's important to know. And then in terms of the economic disaster loan, we're going to have to take one other page off here, and I'm directing him to adjust our makeshift teleprompter. So with regard to the economic injury disaster, again, there's a loan advance that is $10,000, and that's available to applicants who have been approved for an economic disaster injury loan. And that advance does not need to be repaid. So that's an important element of all of this. And you apply, again, through the SBA website. And this is an important thing to remember, that a lot of these programs have been consolidated through the SBA website. And so folks can be able to go there for the information that they need. Now,
and I actually had done this, Senator Tarr, too, and it's like merely a formality at this point. It's so easy to apply for this online.
Yeah, it's important, Corey, and you know, it's refreshing. This is not the way that some of the bureaucracy usually works, but there really is a focused effort to get these resources out there and to get them out there quickly. So with regard to the economic injury disaster loans, they can be up to $2 million. They have an interest rate of 3.75%, but there is a forbearance on those where they do not have to be paid for the first 6 months. So there is time so that you don't have to think about, my gosh, if I get this loan, how am I going to pay it back if my business isn't operating? So there is forbearance on the loans. And I'm trying to get clarification. I know it's at least 6 months that you don't have to pay it back. It might even be up to a year. And so the idea here is there are very generous terms. And one of the focuses here is to make sure that if folks need to maintain social distancing, if they need to self-quarantine, we don't want them making a decision based on economics. We want them to do what's right for public health. And that's also what's driving a lot of the unemployment insurance issues. We just want folks to do what needs to be done to stop the spread of the virus. And so it's easy to apply for these things. Again, very generous terms on all of these programs. And there is also an express bridge loan program that you can also access through that site. And in addition to that, the SBA also is offering some debt relief to small businesses. So under that program, the SBA is going to pay the principal and interest for 6 months, beginning on March 27th, 2020, for qualifying new and current holders of their 7A loans. So a lot of those loans are already in existence, and the interest and the principal is going to be paid for a period of 6 months. So a lot of different tools, and I don't want to be confusing about this, so I want to direct people to the SBA website and also say, you know, if you're having issues with this, please don't hesitate to reach out to either to my office or the office of Representative Ferranti or the office of Representative Hill if you're in Manchester by the Sea. So there are lots of tools available on the web, but there's also a legislative delegation that is ready, willing, and eager to help you. And we are working in conjunction with the federal legislative delegation with Senator Markey, Senator Warren, and Congressman Moulton. So no one should feel like they aren't without an avenue for assistance here, because we're all standing by and ready to help.
And so those are all federal programs that came out of the CARE Act. And then the Baker administration also announced maybe 2 weeks ago that $10 million loan fund that is distributed to mass growth.
And so that's right, Heather. That happened very early on in the situation. And those loans are being provided by the Massachusetts Growth Capital Corporation. But my understanding is the way to access those is now also through the SBA website. Massachusetts Growth Capital also has its own website where you could go to find information. But the idea really now is to try to do one-stop shopping through the SBA website. And again, we've been posting that information on social media. Happy to share it with both of you so that you can also share it because we want people to have all the information they need.
We will do that. Yes. And I just happened to notice one important announcement today about the eligibility of the contract workers for unemployment, contract workers and self-employed. So that decision was just made today, right?
Well, this is an issue that's still in progress, Heather, and I'm really glad you asked the question because there's been a fair amount of confusion about it. So the eligibility and the funding was provided through the CARES Act. But in order for that money to reach those benefits, to reach the people that they're intended for, the state still has to take some further action. So here's what's happening. We, as the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, have to reach an agreement with the Federal Department of Labor. So we have to say to them, here's how we're going to make those benefits available. And that agreement has not been finalized. And this is really, really important because one thing we don't want people to do who are 1099 employees or independent contractors or self-employed, we don't want them to apply until they're eligible. Because if they do, it will make it harder for them to get back into the system when they are eligible. So we're working on that and would love to provide you with some more information. In fact, I would actually ask your indulgence when that agreement is reached and when it's finalized to maybe come back and talk with you about it, because I know in your viewer and listenership, there are a lot of folks that are very eager to take advantage of those programs. Over the years, we have always told people that if you don't pay into the system, then you're not eligible for benefits. And this is a radical departure from that principle. So these are folks that are not being paid into the system, and yet we are making them eligible. And again, the only reason we can do that is because the federal government has acted to provide that funding. Because we do have in Massachusetts an unemployment trust fund, and that trust fund is supported by the contributions of employers. And if we would add this group of people and not change anything else, that fund would become insolvent fairly quickly, particularly under the current circumstances. So we are going in a little bit of a different path. So what we have always told people right now is not the case. So there are going to be a whole group of people that have not paid into the system that are going to be eligible, again, because we want them to do the right thing for public health and not worry about the economic adverse consequences of doing that.
So again, once the federal government determines how to administer this program, they will be eligible. But
sure, and not to put too fine a point on it, but we actually have to tell them how we're going to do it, and they have to agree to it. And so we're working on that right now, and my hope is that very soon we'll be able to tell people that the door is open for the program.
Well, we welcome being able to make that announcement with you and helping you do that. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. And I would point out that we've got 3 people in our office who are working right now almost exclusively on helping people with unemployment insurance issues. So Jenny McCullough and Peter Kazenza and Vicki Morey are all in our office taking those calls, taking those emails for folks that are currently eligible and working through some of the issues. So we want to make sure that if people are trying to get unemployment insurance and they are currently eligible and the system is giving them a problem, we want to make sure they know to call us, and we'll try to work through those issues with them. And we've had a very large number of people already do that, and we're here to help any others that need assistance.
That's great to know. Thank you.
Very well. Anything else, Senator?
Well, I just, one thing in the category of breaking news is that the governor today at his 1:30 press conference announced a new effort at tracing the contacts that people have had that we do know are testing positive for coronavirus. There'll be a lot more information out there about that, but I think the significance is we are now moving to an even more sophisticated tool in the battle against coronavirus, because tracing contacts is really important. It's also labor intensive. So there's a partnership that's been stood up around that. So that was announced today. I think everybody saw yesterday the Patriots plane landing with some much needed personal protective equipment and masks. But something that was a little bit perhaps less reported in the media was the system that we now have, and we're only one of 4 states in the country to have the Battelle system, which actually sanitizes the masks so that they can be reused. And that system is being stood up. We basically have a contract with the supplier of the equipment. They actually also run the equipment. So the bags are dropped off with the masks, and they can do, we're told, as many as 80,000 a day. So not only do we have new masks, but we have sterilization processes available that's going to leverage more utility in those masks. So some very good news. But the last thing that I would say is we did see some projections come out of the command center yesterday about how many people we might see in total be affected by the coronavirus in Massachusetts. And those numbers are very sobering. And so we hope to share some of that information with you a little bit later with a chart that shows that. But information that's very concerning. We need to understand that we are about to head into what we think will be a surge. And it's not going to be easy to deal with, but people should know that people in state government and local government and in the federal government are all working to make sure we're prepared for that surge.
Senator Tarr, we understand you have some interesting updates on the numbers involved in the corona crisis.
I do, Heather, and one of the things that people are always asking us is how long do we expect this pandemic to last? What can we expect to see as we see a surge of cases? And what is it really going to mean for Massachusetts? And one of the things the command center has been doing is modeling the answers to those questions. And obviously these are models, they're not perfect, but I wanted to be able to give a sense about what that looks like. So right now, the projection is that we're going to see the peak between the 10th and the 20th of April. So that time is approaching very quickly. And when we see that peak, we're going to see that the number of confirmed cases total could range from 47,000 to 172,000. So that's really interesting to know. And I provide that information not to alarm anyone, but just so they can know what we may be facing. And that translates into, if you use the lower number, it's about 0.7% of the entire population. And if you use the larger number, it's about 2.5% of the entire population. Now, something that's also interesting that people ask us about is what is the mortality rate? So of all the people that get a positive contraction of the disease, and we know they have coronavirus, how many die? And right now it looks like about 1.5% in Massachusetts, which is lower than in some of the other parts of the country. So a couple of statistics there about just how big the impact of this could be and what the mortality rate could be. And again, I don't say those things to alarm people. I say them so that we can be prepared for what we're likely going to be facing between the 10th and the 20th of this month.
And how do you feel about preparedness? How about equipment and staff, beds?
Well, you know, it's a good question because I think we started off like everyone else, a little bit slow on this, but we are gaining speed every single day. So for instance, at the DCU Center in Worcester, there's 200 to 250 beds that have been developed as a field hospital. And a number of nursing homes have been chosen to be able to also stand up treatment facilities. So some of the patients at those or the residents of those nursing homes are being moved out so that COVID-19 treatment centers can be developed, particularly for people that have already been cared for in a hospital and need to have step-down care in another facility. So we're gaining on it every day. And I think it's a real testament to the leadership here in Massachusetts, not only of folks in government, but also folks in the life sciences industry who are really working together with the National Guard and others to develop this capacity. So I would say it's still very much a work in progress. We don't really know how the surge is going to be. We can try to predict it, but every day our system is getting stronger with test kits, with personal protective equipment, and with the availability of beds and ventilators to be able to respond. We don't know if that response will exactly match the demand. We hope it will, but every single day we are growing stronger in our healthcare delivery system to meet this challenge.
And do you credit, or do you and maybe the governor credit at all the fact that the governor declared a stay-at-home advisory earlier than a lot of states?
I absolutely do, in a number of different ways. Number one, it began the formation of partnerships that are becoming very, very valuable now that we're seeing the benefits of. Number two, it raised the awareness level. When the governor says we are in a state of emergency, I think that gave extra weight to the social distancing and other measures that we were asked to undertake that are so important. And that's something that I can't overemphasize, Heather and Corey, is that we all have a role to play. This is not just a situation where we turn on the TV and we watch the governor every day, or once in a while on 1623, we watch me talk to you. This is something that we all have a role in, to be able to cover our cough, to wash our hands, to be looking for the signs of a fever, to go into groups that are no larger than 10 and hopefully even less than that. So I do think that the declaration of that state of emergency really put a exclamation mark on what people were being asked to do. And we're seeing a lot of that being done. And I think it is going to make a tremendous difference in flattening the curve of the spread of COVID-19.
Let's hope so.
Well, let's hope. I am going to have to apologize. I am being called away here. I am here at the Status. I am being called away. But I do want to say, Heather, it's wonderful to see that wood stove in the background. And I look forward to seeing maybe some sort of cuisine being conducted on the cook stove. I know that you're a pioneer when it comes to food, and maybe we can see that. And maybe Corey and I can give a critique of it, at least how visually it looks in a future segment.
Yeah.
If you come and talk to us again, I promise you there'll be something on that wood stove.
Are you gonna provide like curbside delivery or something that we can use, Heather?
Do that, yeah.
All right, thanks again for your time, Senator Tarr. We'll let you get back to work.
Thank you both. Stay safe and let's stay in touch.
Thank
Take
you.
care.